This is the 38 Zephyr that we have scheduled into a Concours that's going to have to be ready in a very short period of time. We put our name in the hat and we're selected for the Concours. And the Concours is two good things and one bad thing. The one bad thing, let's get that out of the way, is that they're being judged by people who sometimes don't really even know what they're looking at. And I'm not trying to be hypercritical, but we've had this problem in the past where you take a unique car to a Concours and they haven't seen one before, but they're expected to judge it. And that's really not fair to them because they don't know anything about it. They make value judgments. They look for things that don't quite ring true, and they can be right and they can be very wrong. And they're in charge, and you have to just simply politely explain to them, in some cases, why the car is this way. It's not wrong. It's that this car is unique, and that was a special option or something, and and you have to be able to carry documentation in a lot of cases. So you bring your books with you. A friend of mine found out the hard way, and it's important to educate people that are not particularly knowledgeable about that particular car. And these cars are very rare, so there's not a lot of knowledge about them. So you're kind of in a position of educating people, and you have the care and feeding of a very rare, very beautiful car. Then it's your job to share it with the rest of the world. It's not your car. There's no such thing as owning a Zephyr. You're simply taking care of it so that the rest of the world can get a look at it. And in this case, the car was not, in our minds, to a level where it should go to a Concours. It was an old original car. The paint was pretty good, but we decided to start all over again, so we ground it down to bare metal. And because it's a good car, because it was a Central California car from day one, there wasn't a whole lot of rust or damage that we had to contend with. So you can see from the back of this running board, as for instance, these are usually rusted along the edges and bent up. So I mean, clearly this is virtually the way it came out of the stamping at Lincoln. So it's a really good place to start. And the preparation and for the paint is going a lot faster than we anticipated, simply because the car's a really good car. In the past, we've had to take cars that had really tough times, say the least, and we had to straighten up all those problems. That added to the amount of time it took to get it ready for paint and painting it. But you never see that. All you see is the finished product. In this case, we're at about the 2/3 point in the paint. This red splotchy paint here is called guide coating. It's an old technique used for many years. And what you do is you take something like 400 sandpaper, you put it on a roll. A piece of rubber hose is a common thing on a round body like this. And you simply drag it along the surface, and what happens is, as this red disappears, you realize that now the whole thing is level. Without that visual guide, it would be very difficult to tell on a gray background what is going on. So that guide coat, and we might reintroduce the guide coat if we have areas that we're particularly concerned with, but you can see how they've put guide coat all over the entire body. That kind of wispy red on the top of the gray filler primer. You're not looking through to the red. You're actually introducing red primer. It's just red oxide primer, and it dries very quickly. We can start guide coating this, and then if we're concerned that we've got an area that still has problems, we can go back and re-guide coat it, and then sand that back down again. Or we might even go back into it and shoot some more primer on it. Maybe we find a low spot. We're not going to be using any fillers at this point, so we're only going to be using a filler primer at this level of completion. We're not going to be using any bondos, any metal work, anything of that sort, because we're past that, and we don't want to go back. Very careful. This whole thing is a matter of taking it in stages and sticking with the program. And if you do that, you get a better job and you get it faster. We were looking at the Decklid, and you notice that this thing has a widow's peak, which is part of the stamping. And if it isn't, we put it in.
Boy, it's pretty subtle.
Yeah, it's very subtle. I don't think a lot of people ever even notice it because once it's got paint on it, it's very difficult to see, but we have to reintroduce that on the Decklid as well, and we have to line it up for obvious reasons. If they're misaligned, that's not good. You'd pick that up immediately. But it's one of the wonderful nuances of the Zephyrs that a lot of people are not aware of until you kind of show it to them, explain it. Because you're so busy being blown away visually with these cars that you don't oftentimes have enough time to kind of study the very fine details of it. It's probably, like I said, one of the most complicated stampings ever made by any automobile manufacturer. Today, if this car was built, they'd make it in 3 or 4 times as many pieces. It would be broke along these seam lines. This would be broke a number of different ways because production would demand it. The economies of building a car like this, you couldn't build a car like this today. It would be a zillion dollars. And the craftspeople that make this sort of thing possible just aren't there anymore. So it's really a throwback to the days when we had really great craftspeople, and they played a meaningful part in the production of these cars. And it wasn't just Zephyrs. There was a lot of other cars that were built the same way. Some cars were built with the idea of production in mind, and you see a lot of different pieces. That's how you can kind of distinguish, because it's a lot easier to make a little piece than try to pull all this stuff together in bigger pieces. And
Right.
so what we're seeing right now is just the very beginning of the end of the preparation. So we'll sand it now with 600 grit paper, and then we'll take it down to 800, and then we wipe it down very carefully. This is really a critical part of it, because you have the possibility of contaminants getting onto the body just prior to paint. So we have to be very careful to clean it, and we have to use tack-free rags, because remember, rags create electricity. That electricity creates static electricity, and it affects the paint. So we've got to be real careful to use a particular type of rag. There's a special rag that's used for that particular purpose, and we are very careful to use them. We also have to use 2 or 3 different kinds of filters. We also get a brand new air hose, which is sometimes the inexpensive disaster on its way, because an air hose that you've been using is full of oil. It's full of contaminants. And then you go paint a car like this with it. So he requires, and we back him up on this, everything he's going to be using is brand new, including the hoses, including the fittings. Everything's going to be brand new. The filters are all brand new. And that's to prevent contaminants from introducing themselves into the paint and into the clear coat.
Wow.
Okay, and that's how you get a very flat finish right out of the gun.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't realize that when you don't get those contaminants out of there, and you have fisheye, and you have orange peel and those kinds of things, you're just creating a huge amount of expense for the guy who has to sand it. So a little bit of prevention goes a long way when you're at this stage of the painting.